It's over 9,000!
Welcome, Super Elite Warriors, to Final Forum, a podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelli, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force, on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time, and I am joined, as always, by my new recruit co-host.
This is the Bekinney.
And we're on our way to our next destination.
So what are you calling it this time? Kobe Beef 963K?
What? What an utterly ridiculous name for a planet.
Okay. Let's hear what your supposedly non-ridiculous name is.
Well, we've broken this galactic quadrant.
Which covers something like 4,000 light years worth of space, by the way.
Yes, which covers 4,000 light years worth of space. You know, you could be a little more optimistic.
Do you have any idea how many thousands of planets there are in this quadrant? Even if we were just to limit our search to the things we know about planet Earth, we're still talking about hundreds, if not still thousands.
Which is why we're going about this systematically.
Systematically? We're heading hundreds of light years away from the last planet, bypassing hundreds of candidates, all because you have a hunch.
It's not a hunch. I'm taking us to K2-332 because it makes sense.
It makes sense to you. Also, K2-332? That's fairly uninspired, actually.
It's in the K2 section we've cordoned off on our star charts, and I just threw a secondary number at it, based on how many planets were identified in that section. Besides, trust me, it makes sense.
Trust you? You get me killed every other week. I'm supposed to trust you?
You always come back, though. You're like that William Afton guy. Maybe I should have called the planet Afton 332.
Once again, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Once again, it's an Earth thing from some 5-day-long pizza party video game franchise or something.
And once again, I'm very confused as to how you seem to know things about Earth, and yet you've never been there and have no idea where it is.
Hey, maybe stop flirting with that fourth wall and just focus on your job.
You first.
Very well, let's dive into this week's topic. And this week, we are going to be covering episodes 128 through 132. That, I believe, is 5 episodes, which isn't that bad.
There is a lot to cover, as they're mostly filler episodes, and there's a lot going on. So let's start with episode 128, titled Secret of the Woods, or As Quietly as the Sky. So what's the result of Goku's lightning training? Well, it didn't go well despite his small success. It turns out he's been asleep for 3 days. Nevertheless, Goku's ready for round 2, but Mr. Popo thinks it may be too much too soon, so he decides to turn down the difficulty a bit. He uses the console to send Goku to a mysterious forest and tells Goku that he must learn to, quote, feel the sky, end quote. Goku's under the impression that there's a strong person in the woods and he must face, but instead he's unceremoniously dropped into a swamp. One Kamehameha Express later, and he escapes. He does some quick laundry, then he goes on a hunt for food. He quickly finds what is obviously a trap, but, well, he's not all that bright, so he ends up getting caught in the trap instead. But if he's going to be stupid, at least he's tough. Goku escapes the trap and with a flex of his muscles, confronts the woodsman who set the trap. The man decides to bring him to his house where Goku is fed and the situation is explained. The guy hunts boars and rabbits. His name is Moose, and he lives in the woods with his wife, Eclair, and their literal army of children. They even play a marching song when they're introduced. Like that's how not Swiss Family Robinson. What's the musical I'm thinking of? The title escapes me.
Isn't that Sound of Music?
Sound of Music. Yes, that's it. Yeah. Thank you. So from youngest to oldest, we have pudding or puddin, crepe, donut, jelly, biscuit, bavarois, choco, not cocoa, cookie, and shunko, which is kind of like a cream puff. So naming your son Cream Puff aside, the only issue Moose seems to have is that now he doesn't have any meat for dinner, but that's okay because Grandpa will bring home lots of fish. And true to their word, the patriarch of the family arrives with 2 baskets full of fish. Goku mentions Kami, which leads to a goofy bit of dialogue where the kids rank Kami above their dad, but somehow below their mother. They also tell Goku about Yaochun, who's like this local strongman. Grandpa says he'll take Goku to find him, and the rest of the evening is spent goofing around and playing with the other kids. We then cut back to Kame House to check on the training progress of the rest of Roshi's students, which it seems has hit a bit of a snag. Roshi has nothing left to teach them, except maybe how to end up on a certain registry. His advice? Well, Goku went out into the world alone, constantly pushing his limits, but these 3 have become stagnant, doing the same training they've always done instead of pushing themselves further. Back in the forest, Goku and Grandpa head off to meet Yaochun, and Goku soon finds Yaochun's cabin, which sits near a waterfall. A big bear of a man sits outside, meditating. Naturally, Goku just walks up to introduce himself. He throws down the proverbial gauntlet, and Yaochun just says, "Beat a child unconscious? Guess if he really wants it." Except, it turns out Yaochun is a total pushover. Goku quickly comes to the conclusion that this guy isn't who he's looking for, and starts to make his way back to the forest. As he sits by the river trying to figure out what to do next, he's startled by Grandpa. Goku asks when he got there, and the old man says, "I've been here the whole time." They decide to spend the afternoon teaching Goku the ancient art of Zen fishing. It is essentially becoming so still and calm that you, quote, fade away, end quote, into your surroundings. While Goku doesn't realize it yet, he's one step closer to completing his training. That brings us to episode 129, the time room. So what's the next step for our young hero? Sparring with Mr. Popo still hasn't shown much of an improvement, so it's time to up the regimen yet again. Popo's plan? Well, he has to make Goku some new training clothes, but then it's time to go to the time room? One too many times in there. The plan is to send Goku through time to meet a great master of the past. As Goku's having his Alice in Wonderland moment, Yamcha, Krillin, and Chaozu and Tien are going through some backbreaking training of their own, quite literally. They're carrying boulders up a mountain. Tien recounts what Roshi told them back at Kami House. You need to push yourselves further or Goku will just leave you behind. We then cut to a scene with a hot spring and a young man who looks strikingly like a young Master Roshi trying to peep on a bathing woman when a hole in nothingness opens above him and Goku falls out. After chastising Goku for his clumsy peeping, the younger man confirms he is in fact Roshi, Mutaito's best student. Obviously, Goku has to meet this guy for himself, so they set off for the dojo, but not before a quick face-off with a younger Crane. Or at least it would be if Roshi wasn't a coward. At the dojo, Goku introduces himself and asks for a match. While Crane and the other students seem upset by this request, Mutaito happily obliges. Without even taking a proper stance, he wipes the floor with Goku. When Goku asks how such a feat is possible, Mutaito tells him that this is the power of Ki, the fundamental energy all humans are comprised of. Mutaito also tells Goku that he could learn to control Ki. Goku's task? He just has to cut a waterfall. Good luck with that. Mutaito demonstrates for Goku, explaining that he needs to concentrate all of his energy into his fist, then release it all at once when he strikes. Crane's getting a little jealous. And when Fan, who's the girl from the hot spring earlier, drops by, this really puts him over the edge. After being rejected, Crane decides to kidnap her to force Goku into a duel. Crane doesn't waste any time attacking Goku, who treats his fight like child's play, at least until Crane decides to put Fan's life on the line. Sadly, even by putting her in danger, Crane still can't seem to hurt Goku very much. So instead, he opts for ecological terrorism by starting a grass fire to finish Goku and Roshi off. Fortunately, Goku was paying attention in class and finally uses Mutaito's Ki technique to make a path for their escape. Mutaito then shows up to set everything straight, and Goku's resolve inspires Roshi to take his training more seriously. It's kind of a looper situation going on there. And that brings us to episode 130, titled Goku's Doll. So we dodged lightning, blended into the surroundings, and learned about the mysterious power of Ki. So what's next? Why, it's time for Popo to create a living simulacrum of Goku for him to fight. Meanwhile, Team Second String continues their journey to Karin Tower at flash-like speeds. They keep pushing themselves past their limits, and I keep cheering for them. Now that the doll is done, it's time for Goku to start putting together the lessons Popo's been trying to teach him. What follows is a great little fight scene with some interesting camera angles and tracking shots to follow a much more complicated choreography than we typically get in an episode of Dragon Ball. We also get some trickery from Popo, who's successfully distracts Goku, which is yet another lesson, but Goku's undeterred. Eventually, he lands a blow on his opponent, which knocks his mask off, revealing that he is in fact fighting himself. Sort of. Goku gets his butt kicked and complains that Popo essentially made the doll too strong. Popo reiterates that this doll has the same strength and techniques of Goku. The only difference is that this is what Goku would be capable of by training his mind. Goku thinks he can achieve this by matching the doll's expression, but that's obviously a no-go. So what's a monkey boy to do? Well, keep fighting until he's literally too tired to think. Goku takes a breath, calms his mind, and lands a finishing blow upon the doll. He's done it. He finally figured out, wait, what? Oh, no, the doll just ran out of juice? Oh, that sucks. Meanwhile, Team Second String has progressed to the swimming portion of their Iron Man run. That brings us to episode 131, titled Walking Their Own Ways. Hail Satan! No, wait, that's a different portion of the series. So Team Second String is camping next to a Saturnalia separate celebration and something like that, while they ruminate on what Karin's training could possibly be. They turn in for the evening, but Tien is woken by the loud neighbors. Chaozu has a terrible premonition, and the hedonistic partying continues until morning. At Kami's, Goku continues his training after making some baby steps of progress the previous day, this time against Popo, but they won't be fighting. Instead, they'll be playing a game of tag, and Popo will be blindfolded. Popo uses his ki to lock onto Goku's ki, and this easily allows him to follow without having to actually see him. Team Second String continues their journey, but are ambushed by Satanists. At first glance, they're scary, but it turns out they're just regular Satanists. People trying to mind their own business and live peacefully. They invite the boys to their town and explain the worship of a mountain deity that they partake in. The mountain that looks suspiciously like a volcano, by the way. Krillin's crush introduces herself as Mint, and almost immediately the local fauna voice their displeasure. Meanwhile, the game of tag has resulted in a score of 2-0 for Popo. Popo decides on a bit of a change of strategy here, and he has Goku be the person who's it, and he has Goku wear the blindfold instead. Back at the Mountain God celebration, the boys ask about Karin's tower, and they have a few drinks. The village elder decides to listen to their request for info on the tower if they can beat the local champion Pauru. Krillin manages to defeat him easily despite being 3 sheets to the wind, but before they can ask about the tower, the volcano erupts. It's up to Team Second String now to save the day, and that brings us to episode 132, which is titled Hotter Than Lava. So how does a martial artist stop an erupting volcano? The village elder thinks thoughts and prayers will solve the problem, but the boys have a more practical solution in mind. The Second String tries taking on their own mountain of a problem with mixed success. Krillin tries the Kamehameha and gets nowhere except maybe closer to a nice tan. Tien uses the Dodonpa to create a rock slide that will stop the lava, but instead it just sort of flows around it. At this point, they opt for a multi-pronged approach, with Krillin protecting the villagers, Yamcha looking for a large source of water, and Tien using brute force to slow the lava. This combination of strategy seems to be successful and saves the village, but the Hicks seem to think that the prayers are what actually saved the day. However, almost in direct refutation, the eruption continues to get worse, blowing a huge geyser out of the side of the mountain, spraying the town with debris and resulting in another lava flow. It's all or nothing now. All the boys training versus the raw might of nature. Fortunately for the town, the boys win the day. I guess the takeaway here is that ecological destruction is fine if it's to save a village that was built in a lava zone. And that covers all our episodes this week.
Yeah, these are... It's a very mixed bag of episodes. We've been more positive on filler in the past, up to this point, except on stuff where we think it just kind of grinds the pacing to a halt. Even as individually contained filler episodes, there's a couple here that I do not jive with.
Which ones in particular?
We'll get into it a bit, but because I'll have some notes about it, I think. But the one in particular that really rubs me wrong is the time room.
Mm-hmm.
But even aside from that, I'm not super keen on Secret of the Woods, and the last 2 could probably be one.
I agree. The last two could definitely be one. I also didn't enjoy Time Room because I feel like it was more just a distraction. I was okay with Secret of the Woods, but I feel like that. I guess you could say like Secret of the Woods and Time Room. You could probably take chunks out of those and also make those one episode to kind of pick up the pacing a little bit.
I think so. We in our last episode we did the summary for Quicker Than Lightning, and I know that Secret of the Woods is more about calming his mind, but there is a lot in Secret of the Woods that feels repetitive of Quicker Than Lightning. We start getting filler that feels repetitive of other things that we've had, and that bothers me, as opposed to, we really liked the Shikacho episode, and we really liked Terror and Plague, and the Roaming Lake had some fun stuff in it. There's like fun filler earlier in this that's original, completely original to the show stuff, and these feel very just repetitive.
Yeah, I get the feeling this was definitely to pad out their season.
And things we've seen before, like in the previous episode. So, getting into some notes, and we mentioned this last time, we saved what few notes we had for Quicker Than Lightning for this episode. And in fact, our main bulk of notes are going to come from Quicker Than Lightning because it's just the way things work out, right? We don't want to overwhelm ourselves or anyone who's following along at home. I don't know if anyone is following along at home, but we don't want to overwhelm people with here's 11 episodes just because they're all kind of thematically similar. And we like to not do fewer than 2 sometimes. So, hey, it worked out better this time that we recapped Quicker Than Lightning, but we didn't talk about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate not having to write episode recaps for like 11 episodes for one of our episodes.
When we get into Z, you might have to, but it's going to be like Goku and Frieza stare at each other. Okay, next episode, Goku and Frieza still stare at each other. Okay, next episode. When the padding
gets really egregious.
But so going into Quicker Than Lightning just a little bit, and then like I said, we got a really interesting thing on this episode. But Chuu Lee, the character, the little girl who helps Goku recover after he first gets struck by lightning, she's a palette swap of Sururin-sun from Dr. Slump. Sururin-sun is a major supporting character throughout Dr. Slump, appearing quite often as she's dating Taro, the policeman, and she is the sister of Sukusun, who's dating Arare's friend Akane. It probably doesn't really make sense to you, barely makes sense to me while reading it. But
unless you're a Dr. Slump fan, in which case I'm sure it's all really obvious.
Yeah, but suffice to say, she'd be a major supporter. She'd be a major supporting character. Something I would say similar. It sounds like similar to like maybe Chi-Chi. I've never seen Dr. Slump, right? So,
well, then I hope you're right.
She has the family name of Sun, which means pick, and the given name of Sururin, which is derived from crane and phosphorus. Pick, or it might be poop, because phosphorus is often used in fertilizers, so her name might be like a play on crane poop, like pick up crane poop. For a guy, it's hard to know for sure, but it doesn't seem above a man who has the main character in Dr. Slump often waving around poop on a stick.
Okay, yeah, that's about his speed.
Possibility. She's notably the first human being in an Akira Toriyama work to be capable of flight, and though she appears in the manga chapter crossover between Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump, she does not appear in the anime version. In the anime, Taro's role was entirely rewritten to have him be on patrol and running afoul of General Blue as he's out causing havoc. Sururin would not have fit in with that rewrite. But that's where Chuu Lee comes from, is they just took a character that they had already built and palette swapped her.
Nice little Easter egg.
The sacred crown that's in that episode, this this is where we're going to get into it in more detail later, but it very may well be a nod to the golden headband worn by Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, as it's one of the most recognizable elements of Journey to the West and Sun Wukong's design, and it's never been a part of Goku's general aesthetic. He doesn't have a headband of any kind. This band is first sent to Sun Wukong as punishment for his various crimes against heaven and the deities, and serves to rein him in when he threatens to spiral out of control and let his beast-like nature take control. It applies massive pressure and forces him to calm down. Whether or not this is the case, we're going to spend the bulk of the episode talking about this after we get through some of our notes on the rest of the episodes, because it's the only thing I could find a lot of really good information on that I could pretty well link to something in one of these episodes. We know throughout... fails,
go back to Journey of the West.
I mean, we know throughout that the anime staff has definitely picked up on the Journey to the West nods, and Toriyama's been very open about this starting out as an homage or a parody, or it's very much not exactly the same. It's one of those things where if you look at Journey to the West and you look at Dragon Ball, it's like people who try to pair up the Matrix with the New Testament. There's some obvious plays going on, but there's not like a one-to-one. You can't directly compare things to each other. I think it's very plausible that the anime staff was like, hey, you know what's never appeared is this golden headband. Let's do some kind of play on that. Now, Mr. Popo, fun fact, he has an attack called Faster Than Lightning in the mobile game Dragon Ball Z Dokkan Battle. Secret of the Woods, as we mentioned, all these characters are all named after desserts. There's eclair, mousse, cream puff, cookie, jam, biscuit, jelly, donuts, crepe, and pudding. Those are all very popular desserts that I would imagine everyone is pretty well familiar with.
If you're not, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah. I like cream puffs quite a bit.
Cream puffs are pretty good.
There's
I like
a place,
good eclair.
There's a place, it's a chain, but I don't know if it's a regional chain. Have you ever heard of Beard Papas?
No, I've never heard of that. That must be regional then.
It's a cream puff chain, and they have all kinds of fillings for their cream puffs. They have like Oreo ones and matcha and chocolate and vanilla and strawberry, and like just you can go and be like, I want you to fill this with almost anything, you know. They have ones that are dipped in like a coffee candy. That's
okay.
Talk about like a winning combination, like a cream puff.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds delicious.
With like a coffee candy coating. Oh,
so good. Like a nice like mocha or chocolate cream.
Yeah. They have those in space. So in my section of space, apparently it's a regional to my area of space. It's known as Houston.
Yeah, they don't have those in my section of space. We pronounce that buffalo.
Now, Yaochun, this is just kind of a maybe possible reference. In China, the radish is a customary spring crop, and it becomes traditional to eat a radish in the springtime in order to ensure good health and a good year ahead. The idea being if you have enough radishes in your crop to be able to have an extra one for yourself without selling it, you're working at a surplus and you'll have a good year. This tradition itself is called Yaochun. They are homophones only. They are not homonyms. They are comprised of very different radicals. But, you know, we've seen that before where things are homophones and Toriyama's playing with language, so the anime staff could easily have been playing with language a little bit. So the time room, I just want to briefly talk about, here's some of my issues. Aside from it being kind of like a boring episode, there's a lot of contradictions in it with like pretty much everything that we've established up to this point. In a filler episode that I think you could just like ignore this one, just hop right over this one. Roshi is perverted already, which obviously fits with making him easily identifiable, but it would imply he lacks a pure heart, which would mean he could have never ridden Kintoon. Master Shen is shown as being evil long before when Roshi previously said he turned evil. That being when Piccolo, like after Piccolo killed Mutaito. These are things that are already established in the series. And then Goku learning to control his ki. He already is, like, that's what the whole, this is my biggest problem with this episode. That's what the whole series has been about.
I mean, yeah.
The whole series has been about your ki and learning to control your ki and focusing your ki, and Goku getting a lesson on what ki is. It just like clangs as being so wrong.
Also, Goku just straight up not knowing what ki is.
Yes. That's what the whole series has been up to this point. So I don't like it.
We could just retroactively just cross that one out. Nobody needs to watch that one.
Goku's doll. This is a fun one. I couldn't find
I actually really like this one too.
I couldn't find. I mean, here's the thing. I couldn't find anything that Toriyama specifically would have taken from in terms of like sculpting a clay doll that's a doppelganger. But like the idea of fighting your doppelganger, your like nega version of yourself, and I know it's not Toriyama, but still, the anime staff pulls from a lot of the same influences as Toriyama. That is a trope that's as tropey as the existence of tropes. Maybe not the clay doll, but like fighting yourself. And that's
sure. I was initially thinking Star Wars.
Yeah. When he has to go into the tree?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So yeah, the idea of fighting yourself is as old as storytelling, honestly. The one really fun fact I found out here is right from the get-go, I was like, boy, that mask on Goku's doll looks so familiar.
Mm-hmm.
It looks exactly like the Phantos masks, the ones that fly around and chase you when you pick up a key in Super Mario 2. Now, for those who don't know, which I don't know, maybe, because it's entirely possible that you're listening to a Dragon Ball podcast and you're not also into like video games and video game history. Super Mario 2, the game that most people know as Super Mario 2, is not Super Mario 2. It's Doki Doki Panic. The original Super Mario 2 wound up coming out much later on the Super Nintendo in the US for the first time, and it was called The Lost Levels.
Mm-hmm.
Doki Doki Panic was inspired by and was actually a tie-in for, this is wild, it was a video game tie-in for Yumi Kojo 87. Yumi Kojo 87 was it was called Communication Carnival Dream Factory 87, would be how it roughly translates. This was a summer festival held in 1987 from July 18th through August 30th by a bunch of television broadcasting companies, including Fuji Television, Kansai Television, and Nippon Broadcasting, that spanned both Tokyo and Osaka, and had a bunch of general attractions, such as like light shows, like you walk through like, like a light park, attractions, electronics exhibitions, various media and entertainment showcases. And the event was actually broadcast on TV on July 31st. So it was kind of all these, it's almost like the TV corporation equivalent of a Matsuri festival, where these corporations were all kind of advertising the next and latest and greatest in what their general like ways of making shows and broadcasting them and TVs themselves all would be, so that you could get all super excited for the next wave of home entertainment. And as part of the promotional tie-in, the game Doki Doki Panic was created. Ultimately, this game was reskinned and brought to the US under the title of Super Mario 2. And the long and the short of that is that when the original Super Mario Bros. 2 came out, like I said, people in the US better know this as the Lost Levels. Nintendo America representatives who were going to bring that game over and port it to the Nintendo Entertainment System from the Famicom, they thought it was too similar to the original, too challenging for players, and potentially would bomb as a release. Not only just the game itself, but also the future of the Super Mario franchise. They were like, it's like the Super Mario Brothers game came packaged with the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was the flagship game of the Nintendo Entertainment System, and they thought this could sour people on the brand entirely. So why did they choose specifically to adopt Doki Doki Panic? I couldn't really find anything. I also didn't look that hard because this isn't a Doki Doki Panic podcast. But I did find out that the game originally was built as a tech demo for vertical rather than side-scrolling gameplay, and that kind of ties into this Carnival Dream Factory Festival being sort of here's the next thing that's coming in entertainment and media, and that Doki Doki Panic built itself off of the Super Mario Brothers engine. So the Nintendo America people could have said, hey, this, we've heard of this. It builds itself off of that. We are familiar with it. Let's reskin this and adapt it and make it's a popular, it plays the same in a lot of ways as Super Mario Brothers. So this festival takes place in summer 87. These episodes come out in late summer / early fall of 88. So someone on the anime staff must have been like, oh, that's a fun game. Let's incorporate a design element from that.
Sure.
And then Walking Their Own Ways, I just want to talk about very briefly. I don't even have any other specific notes on Hotter Than Lava because it just plays off of the end of Walking Their Own Ways. Mint is another palette swap, but she's of a minor character this time. She's the little girl from the Demon Land episode. And then Pauru, or Paul, the big brother. Okay, this character has a super, super interesting look. It's very specific. Okay. And I thought to myself, boy, he looks so different from all the other villagers, and he's got a very specific design. Someone had to be pulling something from somewhere on this, right? I couldn't find anything specifically. Does that mean that 3 years from now, when Derek Padula finishes his manga book on I think he'll be Dragon Ball Culture Volume 7, he'll be like, oh, this looks just like some character from Crouching Hyena Flying Fortress. He might, right? Because this is what he does for a living. So it's entirely possible that I just have never seen the thing that this character is specifically from. But if you look at those arm bandages, they feel like Muay Thai and very much like Panput or King Choppa from previous tournaments. So There's that. But what I was really drawn to was that headband thing. The bun cover, if you will.
It's like Chun-Li.
Exactly. And that's the rabbit hole that I kind of fell down. So first I started looking into Chinese headwear and Chinese hairstyles. And I kept finding a whole bunch of stuff that's maybe, maybe not. It could potentially maybe be some sort of a take on a wanjing, which is basically just a Chinese hair covering. Your hair was supposed to stay together while you were working in the fields or in battle, things like that. Because also the rabbit hole I fell down by complete accident was looking into the Odongo hair, which is Chun-Li's hairstyle, is Odongo. And I learned from falling down that rabbit hole that hairstyle in Japan is depicted as being for those kawaii girls of anime and fighting games and things. Mm-hmm. But in China, it is a gender neutral, children's only hairstyle.
Okay.
And up until the time you become a adult, you are allowed to change your hair and cut it short and things like that. Now, this is just something I learned. It has nothing to do with the Odongo style specifically, but you're allowed to wear your hair short as a little Chinese boy. When you become a man, you're not supposed to cut your hair anymore. And that's where they get all these like headdresses and things from then, is because you need something to keep your hair in place as you're not ever cutting it again. And that's what I think this little thing is. I don't know, maybe this character goes from wearing it in the Odongo style to like just a single top bun. And that's a lot of Chinese, like if you look up traditional Chinese hairstyles, a lot of them have just a single top bun as a man. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find anything for like coverings for them. That was the issue I was having, was finding out like the coverings on there. It might just be a generic sort of covering meant to just keep your hair tight while you're fighting in a match. But I couldn't find anything specifically. I even looked and tried to like look down like the road of like yarmulkes for people with like long hair, or kippas, which are more Muslim in nature, because this, especially like I tried to look down that avenue because this character seems a little more Middle Eastern inspired in design, at least.
Okay.
I couldn't find any of that kind of stuff. So yeah. I tried. I learned some interesting stuff about, that Chun Lee hairstyle. Like, Chun Lee should not have that hairstyle because she's a grown woman.
And it's a good thing you did that research, because now the rest of us know.
And it's just so it's funny because this is one of those situations where by doing something we talked about in our last episode, in the other way, where Japanese people tend to view other being blacks as a monolith, right? We talked about that. By us in the U.S. viewing Asian as a culture unto itself entirely, we've lost sight. We don't understand the historical context behind the Chun-Li hair, because someone in Japan, whoever was designing Chun-Li, and then obviously a whole bunch of other characters in Japanese media over the years in anime and things, decided that it like looked cool or looked cutesy and they just wanted to use it. And it became seen in the US as like a Chinese or Japanese woman cute hairstyle. But it is traditionally a gender neutral Chinese child's hairstyle.
Are you accusing them of cultural appropriation?
Yes. Street Fighter is canceled.
Yeah.
We've canceled. What have we canceled along the way? We've canceled like Harry Potter, which that canceled itself. Akira Toriyama, witches. We canceled witches.
For legal reasons, I have not canceled any of these things. Jelly can cancel whatever he wants. I have not canceled any of these things. So, back to Sun Wukong's golden headband. It's generally portrayed as a gold ringlet with blunt ends that meet in the middle of the forehead and curl upwards. But it has also been portrayed both slightly more elaborately with adornments and even more simply as just a single golden band. The crown seen in the episode of the anime is more ornate than most versions you'll find pretty much anywhere on Sun Wukong, but the inspiration's pretty clear. When Goku puts it on, he's incapable of taking it off, same as Sun Wukong. Also, the purpose of Sun Wukong's golden headband is to rein in his violent tendencies and unruly behavior, while the sacred crown Goku finds is in service of him emptying his mind and learning to react rather than think. So you can kind of see the parallels there as well. In Journey to the West, there are 3 headbands that are meant to be used for conquering demons. They are first mentioned in Chapter 8 as gifts bestowed on the Bodhisattva Guanyin by the Buddha. Sun Wukong earns the constrictive band in Chapter 14 after he brutally murders 6 thieves who attempted to attack Xuanzang, also known as Tang Xuanzang, while on his pilgrimage to obtain the sacred sutras. The violence causes Xuanzang to part ways with Sun Wukong, and afterwards Guanyin gives him a hat with the band concealed inside and tricks him into wearing it under the pretense that doing so will allow him to recite scripture without the difficulty of memorization. The band takes hold and Sun Wukong experiences constrictive pain until he agrees to reaccompany Xuanzang and protect him on his journey. Another band goes on a bear bandit who agrees to become a guardian to the entrance of Guanyin's paradise home. And the third is split into 5 ringlets, going onto the head, wrists, and ankles of Red Boy, who is the son of the Ox King and Princess Iron Fan. Remember, Chi-Chi is very loosely based on Princess Iron Fan. Historically, it has been argued that the earliest known written down precursors to Journey of the West, which was written in about the 16th century, have been discovered dating back to the 13th century. And these very early writings contain no mention of the headband, and therefore the headband was a creation of the author Wu Chenjiang, to whom Journey of the West is attributed. Further claim is made that the headband is a combination of two sources of inspiration. First, that while on his real-life pilgrimage, Xuanzang met a monk who challenged him to a battle of wits to the death, while the prize for the winner would be the other man's head. Xuanzang won, but instead of decapitating the loser, took him as a friend and companion, and so he was, in a way, in charge of the man's head and controlled it. You can see how over centuries this would be twisted into the idea of a monkey having a headband that could be used to control him magically. The second typical cited source is that slaves during the Han Dynasty, which was from about 200 BC to about 220 AD, wore a metal collar around their necks, and when writing the novel, the author moved the band from the neck to the head. Unfortunately, while that first bit holds up decently as a good general point of inspiration, the second piece concerning the actual iconography breaks down upon further examination.
And this is because the novel Journey to the West, is written in the 16th century, not the 3rd, and it's set in the 7th century. So why would a novel set, 400 years after the end of the Han Dynasty adapt traditions and an element from them for its story? Now, furthermore, while the 13th century writings lack the headband, and it only first appears in written form in Journey to the West, we know that the legend was a passed-around oral story for centuries before it was written, and artwork depicting Sun Wukong dating back to at least the 13th century, if not earlier, shows him with a headband. So, we must look even further back to find the origin of the headband. The Indian Buddhist Havajra Tantra in the 8th century described a ritual in which adherents should dress for worshipping Heruka, a destroyer god. He says the yogin must wear a circlet on his head as part of the ritual, and that this circlet represents fealty to the Buddha Aksobhya, one of the 5 wisdom Buddhas, who is known for his vow of obtaining Buddhahood through morality via restraint of non-virtuous thought. The ritual band serves as a physical reminder of right speech and action, which you could easily conflate over hundreds of years of oral retellings into a thing that compels you to do these things. Though this ritual is described by Havajra Tantra as adapted by 2 of the 6 most common schools of Tibetan Buddhism, it takes a long time for these teachings to even reach China in the 11th century or so, and even longer for them to be properly translated in the 13th century. So it's actually easy to see how this sort of interestingly heard bit of story that people put into art but not written down becomes part of Sun Wukong's legend around the 13th century or after the 13th century when it first gets written down and properly translated in Chinese. So it's not based off of this story about Xuanzang, or maybe it partially is, but it's definitely not based off of the Han Dynasty thing. So from the 12th through 15th centuries, the art of the ringlet inspires non-Buddhists to depict their gods with these headbands as well. And during the Ming Dynasty, the immortal Li Tiguai becomes popularly depicted as a circlet-wearing, sword-wielding guardian of the dynasty. And when creating Sun Wukong, the character as seen in Journey to the West, surely this more common depiction of Chinese deities as fierce warriors wearing headbands inspires Wu Chenjiang to depict the Monkey King this way. So an ascetic monk practice from the 8th century becomes associated with warrior gods, and thus the headband. As for why this piece of iconography is left off of Goku, early concept art for him actually did have it. So it was probably just some troubleshooting between Toriyama and Torishima where they just wound up liking the look of him without it. And if I had to guess, I would hazard to say that Akira Toriyama was like, I don't want to draw that every time.
That's exactly where I was going to go with that. I was like, my money's on him just not wanting to have to draw that over and over again.
Yeah. So do we is that important at all that Goku doesn't have this headband? As you know, we just talked for a bit about how it's always been a part of Sun Wukong's design as long as the novel has existed. It's dates back to probably the 8th century. It might be inspired by some of the stories of Xuanzang himself, but it's not on this character who's based on the character who has it. Is that important?
I don't think it's that important, and my logic there is because one, he's not really a monkey; he's just a boy with a monkey tail. So, I mean, there's already some creative license being used here.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue is that the headband is supposed to represent the suppression of his violent urges. Whereas with Goku, he's pretty much like a nice person from the get-go. Like, he doesn't really have an issue with aggression. His issue now is more that he's letting his own mind cloud his judgment in a fight, which I can see kind of being a parallel for that, but the motivation is a little bit different, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I see the parallels. Like there's a lot of obvious parallels, and that's why I'm pretty sure that this Sacred Crown is in some way based off of the anime staff being like, hey, like, nothing has ever had Goku with headband on. Let's do something with that.
Sure. And at this point, you can tell they're just trying to pull filler content from wherever they can. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. I'm trying to think, if there's other examples that I can readily pull off the top of my head of like, hey, this character, we've been told that this character is very explicitly based on this other character and lacks some specific aspect of said other character, and it is not a big deal. And I don't know, I think like it's funny because in some ways I'll get my Godzilla reference in for the episode since I haven't dropped that yet.
Gotta hit that quota.
We don't think of it so much, but like the original Godzilla, the original story, the 1954 Godzilla, was that he was awakened and contaminated by the nuclear bomb tests, and like the miracle of him is that he wasn't killed. But never is anything said from 1954 up until 1991 about him being mutated by the bomb. It is that he was awakened by it, that he survived it. It's not until 1991 that it's first mentioned that Godzilla is a mutated dinosaur. Okay. And this has become part of his sort of iconography over the years since then, and people think of it as part of what makes Godzilla Godzilla. But the legendary Godzilla does not do that, and neither does Shin Godzilla, and both of those are very well welcome. Neither does Godzilla Singular Point, by the way, which is an anime show, which is like really fun, good sci-fi stuff, hard sci-fi, lots of technobabble. I dig it though, but it's none of those, like, and he's not a mutated dinosaur. In the Monsterverse, the 2014 and beyond American Godzilla stuff, he is always Godzilla. He's been Godzilla just forever. And he just feeds on radiation, which is actually more similar to the original Godzilla in some ways. In Shin Godzilla, he's like some mutated single cell organism that becomes Godzilla. It's wild. So that's one I could think of where like you drop or add even to this character and it becomes sort of its own thing, and it's not important if it doesn't have it as long as you keep to the other pieces of the spirit of the character, which I think it seems like the spirit of the Monkey King or Sun Wukong, and neither one of us has ever read Journey to the West. That's on our eventual list for the podcast. It seems like to everything we've learned over the last, we've been doing this for like 2.5 years now. is that what makes that character is an excitement over challenge and battle. And that's what Goku is at his core. And yes, the characters definitely respond to these things differently because Sun Wukong struggles with bloodlust and murder.
Sure.
And Goku, aside from when he's a child and happens to look at the moon, does not struggle with those things. Generally, aside from when he's assaulting the Red Ribbon Army.
They had it coming though. They're Nazis.
He's just walking around that Red Ribbon Army base like Batman in Batman Returns when he's like strapping bombs to people and laughing about it.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think you can leave off like a supposedly important piece of iconography or part of the character as long as you keep to the spirit of the character.
Sure.
I think the MCU is probably a really good example of that, too.
It's funny that you bring that up because my example wasn't necessarily going to be a character specifically that's missing an aspect of its inspiration, but I was going to talk about Across the Spider-Verse, which is kind of having that same conversation that we're having right now.
Very much so.
With the canon events, and if you miss a canon event, it destroys everything, and it's not the same as being Spider-Man.
Well, and also, that's a really good point too, because after that movie, my son got very into Miles Morales. He loved the idea of Miles Morales. And so I have read like 90% of Miles Morales' comic bibliography.
Nice.
And that's a lot of what Miles Morales in the movie is not the Miles Morales of the comics.
Right.
And a lot of like Jeff West is not a cop in the comics. He's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff. His best friend Genki is like his best, like he's Ned.
Yeah, he's Ned from exactly.
from the MCU Spider-Man
MCU
movies.
one. Yep.
So there's a lot of like important things to Miles, or important in that you would describe, like if someone was like, oh, what are the Miles Morales comics all about? You would like describe a lot of these things in there. Maybe. There's a lot of that stuff that's like completely left out of these movies, but they keep at the core of them the idea of a young kid thrown into being Spider-Man, unsure if he's worthy of being Spider-Man, of a biracial background, and those are that's like the core and the spirit of what makes Miles Miles.
Sure.
And what makes him an interesting character. That's like Goku and Sun Wukong, that they keep the core of them.
And I think it also speaks to, and I think Miles is another good example of this, iterations on characters I think are a good thing because you don't know exactly what mix of things are going to appeal to other folks. I myself, huge Spider-Man fan, been a Peter Parker fan my entire life. Miles is not really my thing, but he's not made for me. He's not for my generation. He's for the generation of kids coming up now who are looking for a hero like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's really just art kind of taking its course, as people take in those things and then they take out the bits to them that resonate and then they put those in their own work, and you kind of get that reshuffling of different facets of that character that I think appeal more towards the audience that they're trying to connect with.
Yeah, I agree. But so that's this batch of episodes. This is a frankly rough batch of episodes as a whole.
I would not blame anybody if they skip these episodes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm usually not super in favor of skipping episodes because I'm like, it's all fine, but like,
yeah, there's like some good little nuggets in there, but you got to wade through a ton of crap to get to them.
I don't mind all the stuff happening with, as you call them, the what is it, team
second string?
Team second string, yeah.
I feel like if maybe they had like focused a little bit more on them and their development with just quick cuts back to Goku just to check on his status, I feel like these probably would have worked a lot better. And I feel like there's also a lot more potential there with the four of them working together and building their friendship that would make a lot of the later stuff involving that group sell a lot better.
Mm-hmm. And also, Dragon Ball is at its best when
everybody contributes.
When its characters are bouncing off of each other. And yeah, I understand like a lot of characters do get lost along the way. You know, eventually Tien Han and Yamcha become basically useless. But Dragon Ball really is at its best when you're playing with the dynamics of the characters all playing off of each other. And we lose that entirely in the Goku stuff in these episodes. That's as I call it, the Popo's training filler arc.
Glad that's over with. Now on to another tournament. Okay, now can you explain anything about this pizza party video game or why you know about it?
I obviously cannot. Can you just let it go?
Every time you ask me to let something go, it winds up coming back later and killing me somehow.
I'm pretty sure you won't get murdered by Freddy Fazbear and stuffed into an animatronic pizza mascot costume. I mean, your proportions are all wrong for an Earthling.
See, that's the kind of comment that makes me think that it will happen.
Shh! Did you hear that?
I did. Should I ignore that too?
Seeing as how the computer says it's coming from the air ducts and picking up movement in there, I don't think so. It could be something that will poison our air supply.
So, I can survive in the vacuum of space.
Yeah, but I only can for a couple days, genius.
Then why are we worrying about our air being poisoned? Let's just open the vents to the vacuum of space and purge everything out.
Well, we could do that, but then we'd have to recalibrate the system afterwards.
And
that is it's like a real pain. How about you just go crawl around in the ductwork and find out what's in there?
Me? Are you gelatinous? Couldn't you, squeeze into a tight space more easily?
I could, but then who would pilot the ship?
Me? The autopilot? Nobody, because it doesn't really need to be piloted once we're on course?
Just get in the vents, recruit.
Fine.
And while Bekinney begins an homage to a classic sci-fi horror film, we'll take our leave of you here, listeners.
Horror? I prefer action. That's why I'm putting on this white tank top and taking off my shoes.
I didn't know you wore shoes. I thought those were just your feet. Anyway, let me just sign off here. Will Bekinney go out to the coast, get together, and have a few laughs? Or will I watch in horror as the motion sensor shows me his ultimate demise? Find out next time and help us achieve our final forum.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kid. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bekinney? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.